This
code.
conference will now be recorded.
One is the fact that we are going to require all properties, rental and owned, to have the smoke detectors, which has been a long-standing ordinance since 1981 in the city. And the other is incorporating the same standard for carbon monoxide detectors in all owned and rental properties in the city effective January 1 of 2022 with the adoption of that code. That is the brief highlight of everything without getting into the great technical difficulties of trying to explain pipe thread and everything else. And if there are any broad general questions from the council, we want to accept them at this time. Yes, sir.
On the required smokes and carbons, are we going to, I know in a lot of cities that we work in, if you're going to do some remodeling, get a permit, they all have to be either hardwired or wireless together. Are we
Yes.
going to require that on new permits?
It is going to be required in a structure that has a permitted purpose of a carbon monoxide detector.
Yeah.
Hardwired is the preferred, but battery option is still allowed. All
Can
right,
we
and
put in there, can we amend that though too now? Because there's wireless ones out there that all sync up. Because if you're doing a remodel on a house that's existing, there's absolutely hardly any way to hardwire them, go through there, because we've been using the wireless ones now. I just wonder if you want to look into that, or you want to, because most other cities, they're good with that.
yes,
That's part of the reason we kind of wanted to bring this up tonight.
Yeah.
If there's anything you've heard or discussion, we'll provide a strike-through version of the ordinance. So additions, separate from the plain ordinance. I wanted to, again, kind of get this out there. And again, I would say, we adopt some cities, most of the codes come out on a 3-year cycle. Whether it's the electric code, the building code, the fire code, they may be off a year of each other. And we're probably most typical is typically we got to skip every other edition. So they'll typically go on a 6-year cycle. Some of your larger cities will, but quite honestly, by the time they go through the whole review, your 3 years, it almost takes a 3-year review. And so most cities are like that. 2012, we're adopting the 2018, even though the 2021 literally just came out. That's a fairly typical cycle.
Chief, if we're going to require that, if we're thinking about requiring the smoke detectors and the other detectors, do we have a plan or do we have anything in place that if a family can't afford a detector where we can
yes, sir.
we
We've
can
had
donate
long-
one, install it?
Yes, sir. We've had a long-standing program with the American Red Cross. We've gotten detectors in the past. We've also utilized some of our operational budget to purchase hardwire detectors for the newer homes that have been built since the early 90s that required hardwire detectors. There's also the Get Alarmed program through the Kansas State Fire, I was about ready to say Kentucky, the Kansas State Fire Marshal's office. In fact, we are getting one shipped out to us this week for a deaf resident that is a specialized detector and alerting system. We have always fielded calls for, I've got a bad battery, I need new smoke detectors. We carry a kit on the engine. We go out and we'll fix it right there on the spot.
Good.
So it's just a matter of, again, we will get back out with the public education component of it.
Perfect.
The same with, we will have to educate the building contractors and everybody else that's coming in for a building permit that's going to be required as part of the permit process. That's why it's adopted in the code as a separate add-on about the detectors and carbon monoxide detectors that are out there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is hearing staff presentation regarding the 2021 quarterly budget review for Q4.
Mayor, members of council, this is part of our regularly scheduled budget reviews that we've been doing for the last number of years. So what we're going to do is run through the major revenue sources inside the general fund, and then talk about the general fund kind of broadly as a whole on the expenditure side of things, and then walk through our other funds as well. Starting with the property tax collection. Again, all these numbers are going to be unaudited. Our auditors are going to be in the office at the end of this week, formally starting that process. So we should get that report later on in the spring, just like we normally do. So all these numbers are the numbers that have been reported to you in your agenda packets. So you've seen all this information before, but again, this is just trying to contextualize some of it and for the folks at home keeping track. kind of frame some of our revenue and expenditure discussions. But on property tax revenues, let's see, we came in, original budget adoption was 2.45 million. We came in a little bit less than that. That the biggest difference is that delinquent tax collection was about 20,000 less than what we had anticipated. We use what we do for property taxes is, for the sake of our internal budget, we assume 97% tax collection from property taxes, and then 2% of that we assume for delinquent taxes. So for whatever reason, delinquent tax collection in fiscal year 2021 was lower than anticipated, but we were within $2,000 of our original budget estimate for overall property tax collection. So that's good. Nothing other than that kind of lower than anticipated delinquent tax line item. Not a whole lot to report out of property taxes. It largely performed as we expected. Sales tax, on the other hand, kind of was a banner year for us in 2021. We originally adopted the budget at $1,464,590. You see that breakdown under the adopted revenue bullet point of those individual items that make up the sales tax. We actually ended up the year with almost 1.8 million. City sales tax largely performed within the averages, our 5-year average that we used to kind of track and predict some of that, but was on the higher end of things for sure. City use tax was kind of through the roof, about $200,000 more than what we had originally budgeted. So a lot of online sales, a lot of things like that. There's money coming back into Edwardsville. WICO sales tax, Wyandotte County sales tax overperformed all of our budget estimates, including the updated estimate that we gave at budget adoption for the 2022 budget by about 60,000. Kind of the similar story with the Wyandotte County use tax, which was significantly outperforming the 5-year average, and also ended up above our kind of our updated estimates. So, the short story from the sales tax and your takeaway from it is going to be, I think what staff has demonstrated is that we're able to either accurately predict our year-end performance, even at the time of budget adoption, which is about 14 months prior to when we get the final, or I should say 16 months prior, before we get kind of the final look at what it's going to, how those collections are going to come in. And whenever we do present that, we're pretty conservative, and we don't tend to have final numbers come in from a sales tax perspective underneath what our estimates are. So when we're giving you our estimates, we're trying to give you that conservative a read on it, so we don't come in with revenue line items in the sales tax area below what we anticipated. We like to see, we like to see it. This was a very surprising number as far as how well it performed, but we like to see it do better than original estimates than worse than original estimates. And for the last number of years, I think we've done that pretty consistently in sales taxes.
Cities across the state have seen a fairly significant increase, so it's not unique to us. I think one of the things that may be going on is you may be having less sales tax slip, or trying to find a better word. So when you purchase things online, obviously it's tracked and recorded, and your large companies are, collecting those sales taxes automatically, distributing them. Where sometimes in the Western economy, especially in the cash economy, things like that, you may not see those same sales getting collected, sales tax, or they get distributed to the wrong place, or things of that nature. So somewhat what online sales is doing, it seems, is better record keeping, more accurate record keeping on that side. We don't know what saying, somebody purchased something, but the Amazons of the world have gotten that down. I think that's why cities generally are seeing better sales tax collection, because the record keeping is better through the electronic means than the traditional tax.
Yeah, so I tend to agree with the city manager's comments too, but one thing we will want to try and keep an eye on as we look towards future budgets is to make sure we are not assuming increased strength in these numbers, because that's been what we've been used to the last couple of years. Of sales taxes keep kind of ratcheting up and up, and you can see in the graph demonstrated how dramatic it was this past year. We want to make sure that we're tempering all that. I'm pretty enthusiastic about these numbers, but I don't want to assume we're going to have another record-breaking year in sales tax, unless we're going to have some indicators prior to budget adoption. But short story on sales taxes, it's, really overperformed. Franchise revenue came in a little bit less than adopted revenue by a little less than that $30,000 mark. That, I think, going forward, so after that big year in 2018, 2019 was the Evergy consolidation. And since then, it's been kind of tough getting a handle on some of their payments. I think now that we're 3 years in, we've got a pretty good handle on how that's going to perform. Again, 30,000 in this particular line item isn't an overly significant amount. Obviously, we'd like the estimates to come in a little bit closer to our final number. But the bright side is, with 3 years in, I think we're going to have a better handle on how franchise taxes are going to perform. And we can kind of shrink that window between estimated total and actual total in the upcoming budget years. Gaming revenue, original adopted budget came into $320,000. When we adopted the budget, there were a lot of uncertainty about gaming and the casino, when it would be open, and those kind of restrictions that would be on it. So we budgeted pretty conservatively on that. We came in a little bit over $400,000. Now, a quick note on that. So that is 30% above our initial estimate, and it's 9% above our updated estimate that we gave at the end of last summer. But there was an extra distribution in there. So the county gives us a monthly, how it's supposed to work is the county will give us a monthly distribution of those gaming revenues based on the performance. I think it's a 1 or 2 month lag before we get that money. Sometimes this has happened once before, they'll do an extra distribution. So instead of, I believe it was November of this year, instead of giving one check from the UG for gaming revenue, we got 2. So there's actually 13 distributions in this. If we back out that extra distribution, we're actually right on where we had updated our estimates. So by the time budget adoption for 2022 came along and we were presenting updated figures for how we thought 2021 was going to turn out, we were pretty spot on as far as what we thought gaming revenue would go. We'll just want to remember that for the end of next year, where we'll likely only get 11 distributions instead of 12. But when you kind of flatten it out over those 2 years, it'll average out. So, but for the sake of 2021, all the better. It kind of inflates that a little bit artificially because some of that's going to be technically 2022 revenue. But for the sake of that line item, performing pretty much exactly how we expected.
We've had similar situations sometimes with the franchise tax or things of that. So typically, even sales tax, but gaming revenue, so at the end of the month, they have to submit it to the state. Take it 10 or 15 days. And then the state has a certain amount of time. And then in the case of gaming revenue, because we're not necessarily a party to the gaming revenue, or to that interlocal agreement, then it goes to the UG and gets processed through the UG's normal processes. If we were a direct pay from the state, we wouldn't see that lag. And that lag is where sometimes it can fall over from 1 month to another month, which then impacts on this. So generally, they're very good about that. My guess is, like everybody with the pandemic and people working out of the office and things, they may have gotten, just got behind with the work. Normally, they're pretty solid.
And it's happened before. I think it's been about 3 years or so ago in this specific line item where we got an extra distribution 1 year and then a short one the next year. But when you look at it all in total, it all adds up. Court fines, adopted revenue was $375,689. Unaudited court revenue comes in a little bit less than that, about a 2% decrease at $367,011. We use a kind of a running 5-year average for this. There's a lot of variables that go into trying to accurately predict our court revenue. That could be anything from people's ability to pay, number of police officers on the street, the kinds of citations being handed out, the actual ability to hold court dockets, which was difficult 2 years ago. But that average calculation that we use kind of keeps us on an even keel, so we're not overestimating or underestimating to any big degree. I think a 2% decrease in the original adopted budget that bears that out. As the year went on in 2021, it looked like those revenues were kind of performing a little bit above, so we adjusted that number up a little bit, and then we kind of came in kind of some slower months as the year came to a close. So that's that 6% decrease under the updated estimates, but all told, not a whole lot to report out of court fines, not a lot of control that we have over the revenue there, but pretty close to our original budget estimates. Kind of a similar story with ambulance fees. Budget was 180,000, came in at about 165,000. There was a period there in the spring and in the summer where it was kind of performing above the trend line, so we bumped that estimate up, I believe, to 190. Then we kind of slowed down a little bit in that fourth quarter, but still less than a 10% difference between the adopted estimated revenue and then what is currently coming up in our unaudited EMS revenue for the year. Again, probably that slow collections that's showing in our quarter 4, so it's driving that total down a little bit, but again, it's within that 10%, and between what Ben is doing over at EMS and some of the changes that we're doing in for our billing, we're sending out less bills and we're actually getting more consistent returns on it. I don't have a whole lot of concern for this revenue item, and I'm kind of interested to see how the audit tweaks that one way or the other. But by and large, not a lot of story in the ambulance fees.
One thing I might really about ambulance and requirement on board. So while revenue is certainly an indicator of activity in those departments, don't let it be a thought that it's not indicator. So the court could be doing lots of work because we have cases that are carried over, you have criminal cases, you have lots of cases that don't necessarily show up specifically in that revenue line because of time, right? I mean, they may ultimately get there, but the workload and the revenues don't necessarily always match up nicely. And the same with ambulances. I mean, you can make 10 calls and all 10 of them be a non-pay situation, a little bit of pay, but it doesn't necessarily indicate the workload that's going on. So I know sometimes we see these numbers and we look at them and we try to place the work, that is the workload number. And you may see other information that provides those calls for service and workloads and court cases and go, well, why aren't those two? They just don't always work out. Just try to get that reminder.
Motor vehicle taxes, this is distributions that we get, and there's a whole lot of calculation that we do to populate that line item. Original budget came in at 158,000. We ended up being 3% over at 162,000, so that's always good. Broadly looking at general fund revenues, we came in 7.1% over our original budget estimates, which is good. Especially considering that, again, we make these budget estimates anywhere between 14 to 15 months prior to we actually get the year-end totals. So, trying to accurately estimate those over a year ahead of getting those final numbers obviously isn't easy, but I think what our staff has demonstrated at this point that in as much as we can predict and accurately provide some estimates, we're able to do that. And I think you should have some confidence in some of the numbers that we're presenting in that respect, especially considering as we get closer into the year. So this graph right here, the first graph that I showed you, that is based on the original budget that we adopted in the late fall of 2020. So that's how we compared when we made those estimates. This is the late fall estimates of 2021 that we updated in preparation for the 2022 budget. So when we had about 7 months worth of data and are trying to predict out the next 5 months worth of performance, we were able to do that at least based on these unaudited figures by 1.4%, within 1.4%, and still even then we underestimated that. Again, we're bringing you these kind of conservative estimates so we don't overpromise revenue performance, but we're still within, we're hitting within that 2% accuracy mark 5 months out from when we get these year-end totals. So again, pretty pleased with that. I like to see our estimates bear out and get that close to what the final ones look like, again, with unaudited numbers.
Look at that over 5 and 6 years, that's really the picture, right? We did well this year, but we did well in 2016 and 17 and 18, And so it's the consistency over a long period of time that really is what's being done. Finance, police, and fire, everybody part of this bigger puzzle. So I think that's, if it was just 1 year like that, the other years were off by, 10 or 15% or something, you can look at that chart. Most of the time we underestimated our revenues for final, but overall we're within, a couple, 1 or 2% year in, year out, which I think is really critical for online financial.
Yeah, really the biggest discrepancy that were between adopted revenue and final revenue, where final revenue came in under adopted revenue. The largest one was in fiscal year 2020. And obviously there was a lot of disruption that year. So even with all that disruption, we were able to perform within, I don't know the exact percentage, but pretty close considering. So that general fund revenues, in short, especially the sales tax and especially the use tax, really overperforming what our estimates at. Not a lot of significant shortfalls in there. There's going to be individual line items that don't perform what we think of, but how we think they're going to. But on the whole, I think staff has got a pretty good handle on our major revenue items and is able to present that information accordingly. So on general fund expenses, so we'll see right now, again, this is unaudited final expense for fiscal year 2021 came in. So those, if the numbers on the right side of that table are red, that means that expenses came in over budget. So we're at that a little bit more than 3% for fiscal year 2021. But again, our increases in spending kept pace with our increases in our revenue. So at the end of the year, as it stands right now with these unaudited numbers, is that we're going to be probably within 0.5% to 1% of revenue and expenditures compared against each other, which means that we're not overspending money that we don't have. It's largely flat expenditure levels compared to our incoming revenue. Right now, the general fund, the year-end balance is looking like it's going to be about 954,000. So we're round up to about $1 million, which is $103,000 higher than what we had originally anticipated. We anticipated a spend down of $200,000 in our fund balance. We actually had a spend down of only $100,000 in our fund balance, and it still maintains that general fund balance at close to $1 million. So kind of the general fund takeaways, we ended the year, again, $100,000 more in the bank than originally anticipated. That's not to say that we made money. We just didn't spend down our general fund balance as much as we had originally presented. Revenues outperformed the original budget estimate by about 7%. Revenues are going, and expenditures, as they're bearing out right now, are going to be, pretty close to each other, meaning we're not overspending in ways where we don't have offsetting revenue coming in. And a lot of those revenue, if I could back up for a little bit on that increase, that budget busting number in the expenditure line, those aren't, I should stress, those aren't, equipment purchases, those aren't additional contracts or anything like that. A lot of those are items that we don't have a whole lot of control over. So the city manager mentioned earlier how sometimes revenue levels don't reflect activity levels. That's pretty accurate in, I'll use court for an example. The booking fees to the state and to the jail were about $25,000 higher than what we had originally anticipated, even though our ticket costs were lower than what we anticipated. So we had, and that's money that we have to pay out to those other parties. That's not really indicative of, or doesn't have an offsetting revenue that works on that same schedule. Similarly, obviously fuel costs are, up all over the place. We'll see increased or higher than anticipated fuel costs in all of our departments. Overtime, a lot of shift coverages for our folks being out for COVID or sickness or whatever. So where we're exceeding budget in our individual departments isn't, I wouldn't characterize it as we're not buying things. It's, we have to pay for things that are largely outside of our control. Back to that summary, like I mentioned, those expenditures are largely going to equal revenue with a less than 1% difference as it's showing right now. We were able to do all this as well as do our compensation and COLA adjustments that we made citywide for fiscal year 2021. And if you remember, we decreased the mill levy by 2 mills in 2021. So this kind of overperformance and really responsibility from our department heads within their individual departments was done with that 2 mill decrease. And we were able to adjust our compensation levels per the compensation plan that this body has, been over before, and still end the year $100,000 more in the bank than what we had originally anticipated. So from a general fund perspective, pretty healthy. I'm pretty pleased with this. Obviously, we'll get some more information when our audit comes in, but that's kind of the general fund takeaways as it stands right now. So I might pause for questions a little bit if you've got any on the general fund. It's a lot of information. All right, moving forward, just to summarize our other revenues and expenses in our other funds. Debt service fund kind of came in right as expected. Not a whole lot to report there. Those are our debt payments, and it's probably the decrease in the revenue for that fund is going to be due to, again, those delinquent taxes. All the other items pretty much performed as normal. So just for the folks keeping along, the two green columns to the left of the table, the first one is what's showing in our unaudited report. The deeper green is what is the original budget. The third column is what's showing up in our report as unaudited expenditures, and then the last one is what came in as our original budget. So again, debt pretty much coming in as expected. Not a whole lot to report out of the debt fund. Special sales taxes, we did spend more in special sales taxes, all on projects that this body is familiar with. The biggest one was street maintenance. In the street maintenance line item, we originally budgeted at 100,000. It came in at about 122,000. That was for our surface seal program. We also, if you remember, rather than leasing the new Parks and Rec vehicles, we went ahead and purchased that outright, which is going to save us an interest cost over the years. And we had the money in the fund, so there really wasn't any value to leasing it out. But that's why those expenditures came in a little bit higher. Obviously, the revenue was significantly higher as well. We really, I should take this opportunity to kind of stress this from a staff perspective. We really want to communicate what this fund has been able to do for us the last couple of years. It's set to expire here within the next 2 to 3 years, and we really, we're going to be, from the staff level and the elected official perspective, we're going to be taking a look at this fund, and obviously between what it's been able to do for our fire department, our EMS, our roads, and for parks and recreation, I think this is demonstrated from a staff perspective its value to operations, to the community, and so we obviously have got a vested interest in seeing that sales tax continue forward. So over the next year and a half, you're probably going to be hearing more about special sales tax and what it's been doing, and just trying to highlight it as a benefit for the community. Special highway, from the expenditure level, you'll see that it's pretty significantly higher than what was originally budgeted at 195,000. That is because 212,000 of that was all related to street maintenance projects. So that is surface seal project, striping, and the 102nd Street project. So we amended the budget at the end of last year to account for those expenses. We still have a pretty healthy fund balance in there. This will be the last year, fiscal year 2021, I should say, will be the last year that has the transfer from special highway to debt. So pretty much all of those budgeted expenditures in this fund for fiscal year 2022 is going to be related to equipment, street projects, things like that. We're not moving it over to debt. So that's special highway fund in a nutshell. Economic development fund, we didn't really have any revenue coming in out of it. I don't know offhand what the $143 is. I will have to look at that. We budget kind of assuming we're going to have some different, reviews or service contracts or legal things. That's what sets that $113,000 expenditure level. It only came in at about $30,000 for fiscal year 2021. So not a lot of activity in the economic development fund to look at.
Part of that came from the movement of training operations. So that's part of that.
Right. Solid waste came in a little bit under on the revenue side of things, which is all utility bills. So we're actually going to be moving forward with sending certain delinquent accounts to a third-party collections agency. We sent some notification out to people who are behind. So if people are making good faith payments, even if they are behind significantly, but they have demonstrated that they are paying and working towards that balance, we're not going to send them to collections. Who we are focusing on and who we've made our outreach to is, you haven't made a payment in 2 billing cycles, which is 4 months, and it continues to rack that up. So we're looking at the best ways to account for that in our internal systems, but hopefully that'll help offset some of those lower than anticipated revenues in the solid waste fund. Sewer fund, not a whole lot of anxiety coming out of the sewer fund. It continues to perform strong. We always overestimate expenditures in the sewer fund to anticipate any, catastrophic repairs or maintenance or contracts that might be needed. Luckily, knock on wood, that didn't happen in fiscal year 2021, and so far not happening in fiscal year 2022. But not a whole lot to report out of the sewer fund other than it remains to be healthy. And in a nutshell, that is the wrap up for fiscal year 2021. We'll get a lot more detail once the audit starts. Again, those folks will be in the office at the end of this week, and we'll be providing information to them. So if you have any questions, I will stand for those now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on it relative to the audit, just so, most of y'all have been here, so auditors typically beforehand, here, they start making a list of documents, records, and things that they want. They'll come, COVID is a little different, but they'll typically come spend about 4 days here in the office to provide the case. They'll pull records, they'll pull minutes, they'll go through lots of things, verifying the financial reports. And typically, they go back to their offices to work on the audit. So typically, they may have questions on one additional documents or some of the things that they can. They verify all our bank accounts, they send out letters. The city attorney gets letters. And so they do all that work. We try to have it here around that first part of May. The final audit. That's when we got to get the full book and we'll get our audit recommendations. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes in the audit process. It's not really visible, but a lot of work happens. A lot of that's been with Sean, in the finance standpoint, a lot of records.
And Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add for the city manager report?
Yeah, just 2 quick things. I will just note that I am planning to be on vacation from the 16th to the 22nd. Hopefully it works out that way. The 2 things I want to add, it notes in there about the leak we had in the ceilings from the court. I don't feel we all got to see what that problem is that's been ongoing. And then today, the hot water heater sprung a leak and had to get replaced. So it got fixed, but it's just an indication of some of these things that happen, right? And we try to take care of them. The last thing I want to just note is we are pursuing, so y'all probably seen a lot of different things out there, but there's a grant application due at the end of this month called BASE, which is Build a Stronger Economy. The state is taking about $100 million of ARPA fund, one of the funds that came down for the state, and distributing it to communities, a grant application around building the economy. We are focusing primarily, what they're looking for is projects that will help expand the economy, new business, new buildings, new employment. Hard to get developed and more than impacted by COVID. One of the areas, and I know you all talked about, is some of that area that makes up what we call the William Road TIP district. A lot of that area that hasn't developed because of infrastructure, and so that's really where we're focusing our efforts on our particular application. We anticipate there'll be lots of applications out there, multiple applications, probably out of one. I just want y'all to know we're definitely working on that, getting all of that together, because it's due on the 28th. So
Zach, did you have anything else?
Not strictly speaking from a manager or a assistant city manager report, but I would like to thank our random Riverview resident for the Valentine's Day festiveness that you see at the podium. So thank you, sir.
Random.
Chief Matthews, did you have anything to add? Chief Whittem, Dusty.
I did not mention in my report, but we're getting the sewer data collection thing kicked off. We had a meeting in the last week, and that project didn't get kicked off either. I don't think I mentioned that in the report, but
Very good.
we're excited about that. Get a map that.
Perfect. Thank you. Councilman Bishop?
Yeah, I just, everybody knows what happened Thursday night at UG. How are we going to address that? This safe and welcoming that they adopted?
Well, I may defer to Mayor Kavar, I mean, speak on that. You know, with the, formally, the body, the mayor, on behalf of the city council, we did send a letter expressing concerns of, you know, of some of those actions and just how will it impact us and, you know, who applies to. We did receive a response from the UG legal department. And if there's other comments, I'd probably defer them to the mayor at this point. I mean, we're happy to pursue whatever actions may be needed. As we understand at this point, you know, it does not apply to actions of our city or applies to our public safety department.
Correct. So our understanding at this point is they are not, they know that our police department, the highway patrol, Bonner Police Department, they are not involved entities in the safe and welcoming, what they're calling Kansas City ordinance. The Attorney General has made a statement that it does affect everyone around it and people visiting Wyandotte County. And so there are mixed concerns there. One thing that was mentioned at the meeting that we could do as individual citizens is potentially email the commissioners. They said there is still room for contract negotiations between the county manager and the third party that they're putting in charge of the identification cards. One thing that they might be able to address is removing the ability for that third party to waive any residency identifications or other identifications that was given to them in the ordinance, saying, well, they can create alternative methods of ID. And so that's something they said potentially could be buttoned up in the contract negotiation. There were a couple of things that might be a good idea just to email them and if you have more concerns, and email them individually as commissioners and encourage them to take further steps in that negotiation. But they did pass the ordinance that evening. So that's the only other, the method from there is if they're negotiated out from that point. But Edwardsville is not a part.
Just one more thing. Hey, with the mapping the sewer system,
Yes.
have we, do we have an inventory sheet of things that the city owns, like stop signs, street signs, you know, in case a tornado does come in here and rip us apart? Do we have an inventory of that kind of stuff?
I don't know that we have a full inventory of signs. It's one of those that also with the now having GIS availability to us and some mapping. I mean, we do need to do that as well. And really it's around reflectivity and age of signs, right? So one of the things that we have to maintain is the reflectivity of a sign. So, you know, a stop sign doesn't last forever. I mean, and so those have to be replaced. Now, I believe, and I would have to defer to Dusty, but as we've been changing out signs over the last couple of years, we're making inventory of when we're doing those, but whether we have a full inventory of every sign as an example in the city, I don't know that we do. Dusty can correct me.
No, we don't.
Okay.
We're good to have one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But that-
absolutely.
I think that's.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
As we build that sewer map, that's kind of gonna, I think we're just gonna start building on top of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Bradley, the GIS, for Bradley, the planner has been really helping us with. Those would be good. One thing is just the data collection of those is gonna be expensive. Too, but I guess we're kind of, right now, we're working on like the sewer's kind of a
Yeah.
focus right now, because it could be a big cost if something bad happens. It's nice to get that under control, and yeah, I think that's a good point, we should start looking at those things as well.
So stormwater is a, we did do a stormwater inventory about 2 years ago, so we have that data now as well. It's kind of a side note, if we do our budgets on cash basis, when you do them on a generally accepted accounting principles or GASB, Government Accounting Standard Board basis, you actually depreciate all of your assets, and so you have to maintain somewhat of a very complicated asset management system, right? Down to roads and curbs and gutters and wires in the ground and buildings and, and everything. But the concept of having a good asset management system is certainly valuable. We've kind of started with some of the big ones, right? Things like the sanitary sewer, the stormwater, streets are somewhat easy to keep up. They're a little more visible, but keeping up, when did we last pave them? When did we crack seal them? When did we seal coat those? And those are some of the things that Dusty's been working, on with a 6-year kind of a maintenance schedule, try to touch every road in kind of the 6-year cycle. So we're kind of at the early stages of gathering data and putting it into these asset management type systems.
One thing cool about the, like the sewer manhole system is we've kind of been trying to really work with engineers and GIS people at their firm, to come up with a numbering system to tie it to the GPS location based on kind of a grid system that they built. But the nice thing about that is we'll be able to put, SS will be sanitary sewer, and if we want to put TS could be traffic signs or something like that. And then it'll just build off of that same location, it'll be tied to the GPS of that location. So it'll be really easy to start throwing those things.
Done.
Councilman Millet?
I was just gonna add, I've been curious about our ambulance situation. Are the new ambulances coming, or was there some ambulance ordered or something?
I'll let Chief Whittam handle
I was
that.
just curious about that.
It's on order. I wish I had great news. We are the next chassis that's supposed to show up in North Carolina. But all those Super Duties are sitting at the Kentucky Speedway waiting on a chip to come out of a box. So as soon as there's 500,000 chips that show up, we'll see an ambulance. We were just on the phone with our representative within the last 2 weeks. They are, like we said, we were the next chassis coming into the shop. So we're talking about probably the end of May timeframe.
Okay, that was just something that crossed my mind. I was thinking about that. With the snow and all, that the equipment was able to go out and do what it needed to do.
I would say, but both of our ambulances we have, right? I mean, one of the reasons why you order these things way out ahead, and I know sometimes like, why are we ordering this now? Is because these things happen, and then the mileage and the age. But I mean, I believe both of them are in full working order.
Well, I was just curious because I knew that we had talked about, or you had ordered them quite a while back and wondered where they were. Zach, I don't know how to ask this, but when you said we somewhat underestimated the revenue, is there some consequences to that, or is it a good thing, or?
Well, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Obviously, we like to see revenues come in higher than what we anticipated, but it does kind of cut back on our planned activity at the beginning of a budget season. So, when we had at the beginning of a budget season, we try to give you as conservative and realistic numbers as we can get. And I think that's a strategy that we will stick to. One of the, I don't think that it's the revenue side of things that, from a budget perspective, that I would, count as a negative, but maybe on the expenditure side of the equation, because when we have I think we've proven the ability over the last couple of years that we have a good monitoring system of the revenue that comes in. And so when we present revenue, estimated revenues lower at the low end of what we're anticipating, you know, again, I think that's a good practice, but I don't want to make that, I don't give the impression that that means staff shouldn't have, you know, some flexibility to make the recommendations for expenditures, you know, that might be reflective of not just the year revenue within a year, but also our total fund balance. So if we can maintain our healthy fund balances at the policy levels that we've all set, then, you know, I think that, I guess my point is that staff has kind of demonstrated its ability to stay within budget. So I don't want to, I'm not going to ever be in a position up here where I'm giving you overly inflated revenue numbers for the sake of, you know, look at all this money we have, now can we do something with it? I'm going to, staff's, you know, tact is to provide you as accurate and conservative numbers as we can. But all I would, you know, preface that with is, you know, our department has do a really good job. So if they're coming to this body with, you know, recommendations or requests for programs or equipment or staff or whatever, it's that they've done the work to demonstrate that to you administrative levels. Otherwise, it wouldn't get to the level where they're making that ask. So I don't want to say that, you know, our strategies in presenting revenue is going to change too drastically, but I do hope that it is indicative of you know, the level of you know, competence and understanding that our department heads bring. So whenever they're making recommendations for budget, you know, they can provide on those recommendations and deliver those recommendations in a fiscally responsible way.
I think the way most of y'all manage the budgets is really great. I mean, you do such a wonderful job, and have just something that just kind of hit me. I'm thinking, I wonder what happens, you know, when you're getting more money than you thought you were going to get, and then what do you do with it? When do you get it? And
again, so we didn't make money this year. We spent down our fund balance less than what we had planned on. And when we presented the budget, we planned on a spend down, but still maintaining our fund balances at the, you know, at a pretty healthy level. And we still spent it down, largely. I mean, some of that was obviously we're being conservative with things still being up in the air with COVID, but we wanted to pass on that property tax relief to the residents, which is going to have an effect on revenue. But all that being said, I don't want to give the impression that we really, from a revenue standpoint, really did perform better than what we thought. But we're not making money. We made more money than we thought, but at the end of the day, it's not like we're just adding money to the general fund balance for the sake of it being there. We just spent down the fund balance less than what we had anticipated.
I've been around long enough that I should know that, but sometimes I have to be reminded of things. Then the last thing, I didn't know on when you said something about the street improvement that we did in 21 versus 20 and before, could there be some kind of a little note put in the hot shot of some of the improvements that were made in 21? Just, you know, just a little blurb like what we did here, we did here, we did here. I think that could maybe kind of help satisfy some of the public perception of what goes on with our street maintenance system in Edwardsville.
Yeah, I tend to agree. We try and do. We were knocking on $600,000 as far as street maintenance expenditures in 2021, including, you know, routine maintenance, pothole stuff, and then the major projects that Dusty's managing.
I think the credit goes to Dustin on that, and, you know, all of you guys on the planning of that. But I think that we need some kind of way of making the public aware of that. So maybe it could calm down some of the social media stuff that goes on out there. Maybe get a little information out to what we have done. So
I just want to note too, I mean, we did put a lot out during that time. And I think as Zach said, I think for the public to better understand, especially around the special sales tax, how effective that's been. And if you think about, had we not had that, what we wouldn't have, right? We wouldn't have a modern fleet of fire equipment that we have.
I agree.
We wouldn't have a lot. So I think part of our outreach is going to be demonstrating and showing how that has benefited this community, and not all of those dollars come from this community.
Well, I was a big advocate of that special sales tax when that was 10 years ago, 8 years ago, wherever it was. And I was fortunate enough that it passed. And I've mentioned that before, you know, that we need to make sure that keeps coming along for that purpose entirely, for the fire truck, for the street, you know, for everything that we get out of that. I think big advocate of that, so.
The other side note, and I'll just mention, so there is a Senate bill, I should have, Senate Bill 87 that is being considered by the legislature. And what that bill does effectively, and I think we would be opposed to it, is if any county sales tax that's adopted going forward would only go to the county. Where today, right, when the county adopts a sales tax, it is split among the various city entities, because where does the city say, where does the tax get generated? You know, Wyandotte County is a little unique because we have only a small portion that's not in the county. But pretty much all the sales tax is being generated within the incorporated cities. And that's true even in more rural areas. Most of the tax is generated in a particular couple of communities. But what they're proposing is local governments, that is cities, would no longer receive any of those sales taxes. And that could have a very detrimental effect on us and other cities.
Do you know when they'll be hearing that?
I'm not sure what the hearing date is. We just got an announcement like in the last 24 hours.
Okay.
It's a carryover bill from last year. But
Sure. Yeah, I
you can
remember
look it
that.
up. I don't spend a lot of time.
Right.
Let's get home with that. Senate Bill 87.
87. Let's work on maybe preparing a letter on behalf of the city to send to the legislator in opposition, and then we can talk about that more later. Garrett, did you have anything else?
Nope.
All right, Councilperson Shriver.
I want to add on to Garrett's comments about the sales tax, what the city has done with that money. Garrett mentioned putting in the hot shot, maybe even going further, putting together a letter, some kind of flyer, just information, our highlights, our successes due to a bullet point, not paragraphs that they have to read. Nobody wants to read paragraphs, but some kind of a highlight that speaks volumes. Whether it be just a self mailer or something going out with the bill, something, that way everybody gets it.
Yeah, we're gonna be pretty consistent, and we've got a hard copy newsletter going out by the end of this month. And pretty much in all of the kind of outreach that we're gonna be doing is gonna be dropping in, just again, demonstrating the good that revenue source has done for the community.
That would be huge.
I think one of the things, when we adopted the sales tax, and we had some unsuccessful, kind of focuses on that. But when we adopted this one, there was a pretty active small group of people that really helped get the word out. And I think, we're coming to that time when we need to start the process and get it out there, because, it's not just the election, and then it's so long after the election. Is there, like tweaks to it that, where those dollars go to, where the tweaks to it. So I'd say probably within this year, one of our goals, maybe towards the end of the year, is going to be really formalizing the process, when it's going to be our election date, right? Because we can't get held at any time. It's going to be on, an August or November ballot. That type of election, in person, mail, whatever. There's a lot of pieces that go with that. And so I would just say, as a council, be thinking about how we want to move that forward, with the assumption that we want to remove that sales tax.
I also want to congratulate Warren Robert Grant. What a high honor. Exceptional honor. Last thing, I want to just quickly refresh my memory. I can't remember. I think we've talked about it. Maybe we haven't. The gaming revenue. That's between Hollywood and the county.
Yeah, so when the law was passed.
Well, and that, I don't mean to cut you off, but I have a question.
Okay.
As I understood the contract, the agreement was for Hollywood, the casino, to build a hotel.
Correct,
Each year they don't, they pay a fine.
correct.
Do we get a share of that?
We do not.
Why not? You don't have to answer tonight, but
Well, that was a side contract.
we weren't
made
included
between
on that.
you- I will say that if you refer to the 3-city agreement, when we said we weren't going to do such side agreements, it may be a good time to pull out the old agreement. And do it.
Okay, when you get a chance, if you could. That's all I have.
Councilman Scott?
Budget process and forecasting. Zach and city staff, I really applaud you guys' efforts. Presentation was good. A lot of information there, and I appreciate that. It's a lot of data collection and record keeping, and it's not a fun process. It's a necessary process. I hope the audit goes well. I'm sure it will. But again, I appreciate all that information, those numbers. That's all I've got.
Okay.
Oh, I have one more thing.
Okay.
Thank you for the flowers.
If random.
Thank you. Yes,
The unknown resident.
yes.
So a couple of council people and Mike had discussed having a council retreat, and we've narrowed down a couple of dates. So if you guys want to just email Mike and let you know we're between March 5th and March 26th, that would be a Saturday. Just check your calendars, email Mike. We'll just pick the one that most can make it to. Hopefully that works out for everyone. Mike, I think we had discussed this before. There's a median on Wood End. There's no street lights right there. And I've had people from the community, including myself, drive through there and almost hit that median because there was a sign. I believe the sign was taken out. Then there was a cone set there. The cone's gone. Do we need to paint it? Can we get that sign back up, or what do we need to do? Because it's super dark right there.
Well, I think that we have spoken about this. What we believe we need to do is take that median back a section or two, whatever, 10 feet or so, report, put the sign part back. What's happening is when those trucks are turning, they're clipping it either with the fender or maybe with a mirror.
Okay.
Or maybe their trailers catching it when they're coming around. They don't. I'm sure sometimes they know it, and I imagine sometimes they don't. We replaced that sign, I'm going to say at least a dozen times. We've moved it around, but we take that property. The intersection lighting, it could be, the state puts those large lights up, but they don't do much to light that particular.
I wonder if in the process, while we're waiting for the median to be cut back, Dusty, do you think we could paint yellow and maybe put some reflector tape or something up there for the end until we get that cut back? Is that doable?
Yeah, we could possibly use more signage, do a little bit of stuff there too.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get something done. I mean, we have been, I know you and I spoke about this. We spoke about it.
Yeah. Well, there was a cone put out there for a while. Now the
Yeah.
cone's gone. So I was driving through the other day and noticed. Okay.
Put some additional paint down for the temporary, but see if we can't move up, getting that redone, that cut back. I mean, it'll be a little, with winter, we didn't want to do it with everything else going on and asphalt and concrete, but I think we have a plan of action. And now the weather's hopefully starting to get a little closer to springtime.
Yeah.
Perfect. I did have a trip to Topeka between the last council meeting and this council meeting, and that was the Legislators' Day. Just wanted to give a quick update on that. Met with some state senators, hopefully grab their attention on some issues facing Edwardsville. Hoping to get some nicer medians or touches on K32, some other things that might help our folks financially in the future and keep our budget low. So just wanted to give a quick update on that. Thank you, Zach, for the presentation, and Chief Whittem for the updates for that fire code. The red line summary that'll be coming with that before the next meeting is incredibly helpful to see what the exact differences are. Everybody have a great Valentine's Day. We're adjourned.
What were those dates? March 5th and what?
26.
26th?
Well, 7:10.
Because yeah.
I know.
Penalty every year.
And I don't understand, but it's like.